The most dangerous surrender does not feel like collapse. It feels like relief, a quiet internal permission to stop carrying the weight of your own judgment, to let something outside you decide what is true, what is allowed, what is safe. Nothing dramatic happens in that moment, no alarm, just a subtle easing followed by a dulling you mistake for peace. You know this state more intimately than you admit. There is a moment, usually right before something in your life demands courage or clarity, where your thinking narrows, not because you cannot think, but because thinking suddenly feels risky. Your chest tightens, your language becomes borrowed. You repeat ideas that are not fully yours because they cost less to hold. Inside, there is a strange calm that is not relief, not rest. It is preparation for obedience. What follows is not ignorance. It is something colder. The willingness to hand over responsibility for seeing clearly. This is where intelligence quietly stops protecting you. You can still speak fluently, you can still argue, but your thinking no longer belongs to you. It serves something else now. Belonging, safety, the avoidance of inner conflict. What you are about to hear will not offer comfort. It will make a mechanism visible that most people rely on without knowing its name. Once you recognize it, you will notice it activating in conversations, in beliefs you defend too quickly, in the sudden urge to align instead of question. It does not disappear when seen. It tightens first. If you feel the impulse to turn away from this, to dismiss it as excessive or abstract, pay attention to that reflex. That reflex is not disagreement. It is protection. And the fact that it has already activated tells you something important about what is at stake. This is not about morality or history. It is about the exact point where you decide whether awareness is worth the cost it demands from you. That decision is made more often than you realize, usually in silence. Stupidity is usually described as a lack, a missing capacity. Bonhoeffer saw something else entirely. He saw a cycle of belonging, emotional safety. In that moment, the mind does not fail. It steps aside. You have felt this, the moment when a thought forms but is quietly interrupted by a stronger impulse to stay aligned. You notice a tension in your body, a pressure to simplify, to repeat what is already accepted. The relief comes immediately after, a softening, as if something heavy has been put down. That relief is the reward, and it teaches you something without. Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood that this state does not require low intelligence. In fact, intelligence often makes it more efficient. It builds better justifications. It explains away discomfort. It turns obedience into virtue. What collapses is not the ability to think, but the willingness to bear the consequences of independent thought. This is why stupidity spreads so. You no longer have to tolerate ambiguity. The cost is subtle but permanent. Your inner authority weakens. Decisions begin to feel foreign, as if they arrive already made. And if thinking can be shut down not by force, but by relief, then the danger is not who controls you. The danger is what part of you is relieved when you stop controlling yourself. Psychological safety rarely announces itself as fear. It arrives as certainty, as the feeling that you finally know where you stand, who is right, and what must be defended. Erich Fromm understood this as a trade. Freedom creates anxiety because it forces you to choose without guarantees. Safety offers relief by narrowing the world until choice disappears. You recognize this pattern internally, the subtle comfort you feel when your position becomes unquestionable. Your thoughts line up neatly, and something inside you relaxes because the burden of deciding has been replaced by the comfort of agreement. This is not peace. It is sedation. Erich Fromm described this as the escape from freedom, not a dramatic flight, but a psychological leaning. You lean into systems, groups, or ideas that promise certainty because they spare you from confronting your own ambivalence. Over time, the price becomes invisible. Your inner contradictions no longer speak. They are drowned out by borrowed convictions. What makes this seductive is that it feels like maturity, like moral clarity, like finally being grounded. But the grounding is external. Your sense of self becomes dependent on alignment. Disagreement starts to feel like a personal threat, not an intellectual one. And without noticing, you begin defending positions less because they are true, and more because losing them would reopen the anxiety you worked so hard to silence. And if safety is purchased by shrinking the range of what you are willing to see, then the question is not why certainty feels so good. The question is what parts of you had to go quiet for it to feel that way. Intelligence is often treated as a shield. Education, vocabulary, analytical skill. Hannah Arendt shattered that illusion by showing how thinking can be present. The moment judgment feels dangerous, intelligence reroutes itself. You have experienced this internally, the strange ease of explaining something you no longer feel aligned with, the fluency that appears when you defend an idea that does not sit right in your body. There is a slight numbness when you speak, not confusion, distance, as if the words are doing the work so you do not have to stay present with what you actually sense. Hannah Arendt called this thoughtlessness, not stupidity, not ignorance, a suspension of inner dialogue, the quiet absence of the voice that asks whether something should be done, not whether it can be justified. Intelligence becomes logistical, efficient, clean, and entirely detached from responsibility. This is how people who are capable of deep thought participate in things they later claim they never agreed with. The agreement was not verbal. It was psychological. The relief of letting systems decide what conscience no longer wants to hold. And if intelligence can function while judgment is offline, then the threat is not losing your ability to think. The threat is losing the part of you that decides when thinking must turn inward and become accountable. When inner authority collapses, it does not feel like loss. It feels like efficiency. Decisions arrive faster. Doubt disappears. You stop arguing with yourself. What vanishes is not noise, but authorship. Someone or something else begins speaking from inside your head, and because the voice sounds reasonable, you assume it is still yours. You can sense this state if you look closely. The way your reactions feel preloaded, the way certain conclusions appear before you have fully considered the question. There is a subtle emptiness behind the confidence, not confusion, but absence. As if the part of you that once hesitated, weighed, and resisted has stepped out of the room without announcing it. Carl Jung described this as unconscious possession, when the ego no longer mediates between inner forces and outer demands. The psyche is occupied, not violently, quietly. Ideas think them. This is why the loss of inner authority is so difficult to detect. Nothing feels wrong enough to trigger alarm. You are functioning, productive, certain, but something essential has gone offline. The capacity to say no from the inside, the ability to stand alone with a judgment that has no external backing. And if no one is home inside when decisions are made, then the danger is not that others will influence you. The danger is that there will be no one left to notice when they already have. Obedience today rarely requires commands. There is no need for threats when anticipation does the work. You learn the limits without being told. You sense what will be rewarded, what will be punished, what will be ignored. Over time, you begin adjusting before anyone asks. Control becomes internal, efficient, almost invisible. You can feel this mechanism operating in you. The pause before you speak, the instinctive edit that happens before a thought fully forms. You tell yourself it is tact, realism, maturity, but beneath that explanation is a quieter calculation. What reaction will this produce? What friction will this create? And is it worth it? Most of the time, the answer arrives before the question finishes forming. Zygmunt Bauman described modern power as diffuse. Responsibility is spread so thin that no single source feels accountable. This creates a perfect psychological trap. When no one appears to be forcing you, compliance feels voluntary. You tell yourself you chose this, that it aligns with who you are, that resistance would be unnecessary drama. The cost emerges slowly. You stop noticing what you have stopped saying. You stop registering the weight of what you have adapted to. Your obedience feels clean because it is self-administered, but something in you is constantly monitoring, adjusting, shrinking its range of expression to avoid invisible consequences. And if obedience no longer needs orders to function, then the real question is not who is controlling you. The question is what you have already trained yourself not to think. Moral certainty often feels like strength, a firm stance, clear boundaries, but beneath that rigidity there is usually something softer and more afraid. Fear that has learned to speak in absolutes because ambiguity would reopen a question you no longer want to carry. Certainty becomes armor, and armor, once worn long enough, starts to feel like skin. You notice this internally when nuance irritates you, when complexity feels suspicious, when someone asking a careful question triggers a reaction stronger than the question itself deserves. Your body tightens, your tone sharpens. There is a sudden urgency to close the discussion, not to understand. Friedrich Nietzsche saw morality not only as a system of values, but as a psychological strategy, a way to stabilize a fragile inner state by turning fear into righteousness. When something frightens you but cannot be confronted directly, it is recast as evil. Once moralized, it no longer has to be examined. It can simply be rejected. This is how fear hides from itself. The more fragile the inner structure, the harsher the moral tone becomes. Subtlety is intolerable because it threatens to expose the anxiety underneath the conviction. And if moral certainty is often fear wearing a mask, then the question is not which side is right. The question is what inside you needs the world to stay simple in order to feel safe. There is a particular kind of blindness that does not come from ignorance, but from preference, a quiet decision made below language. You sense something is off, but you look away before it fully forms, not because you cannot see it, but because seeing it would force a reckoning you are not ready to face. You recognize this internally by the timing. The moment clarity approaches, something interrupts. Distraction, cynicism, fatigue. You tell yourself you will think about it later when things are calmer, clearer, more stable. But later never comes. What comes instead is adaptation. The discomfort fades, not because it was resolved, but because it was avoided long enough to go numb. Fyodor Dostoevsky understood this mechanism deeply. His characters do not lack insight. They flee from it. They choose suffering they can predict over truth that would dismantle who they believe themselves to be. Self-deception is not a flaw in perception. It is an act of will, constant maintenance. You must keep reinforcing the story that allows you to remain intact, and the more effort it takes, the more threatening awareness becomes. Truth is no longer just inconvenient, it feels dangerous, and if blindness is chosen because awareness would collapse something you rely on, then the real threat is not what you are avoiding. The threat is what your life has been built to protect from being seen. If this unsettled you, don't look away. Sit with it. And when you're ready to go deeper into what most people refuse to see, stay here.